I know I promised you guys we're going to talk about head coverings. I know you guys are really excited to do this. So I'll read to you the passage. So we have a family WhatsApp group, and I threw this bomb out there, which was a tweet that basically, I'll read it to you guys real quick, and then I'll read the passage here. So there's this tweet that went out that I was fascinated by. It says, "Here's a little historical fact. Make of it what you will. In every single denomination of Christianity on every continent, Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Coptic, Lutheran, Continental Reformed, Anabaptist, Anglican, Presbyterian, Puritan congregation, goes on and on, Separatist, General Baptist, blah, blah, blah. Women wore head coverings until the 1900s. Now, I was a part of I grew up actually in a tradition where women wore head coverings in the 1970s and 80s. And then we left eventually, that group, when I was in 8th grade. And so this is a really interesting topic. I think it's really important to actually talk about more than we do, because I think it kind of gets to, it helps you understand like how to interpret parts of the Bible. It helps you like kind of work out family issues, gender issues. All these things are kind of intertwined in this topic. It's not easy to interpret this, right? So Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11, "Be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Now I commend you because you remember me in everything and maintain the traditions, even as I delivered them to you." I think every part of this is really important to look at. So he's using this word traditions. He's like, maintain the traditions. This is kind of the context. He's kind of rebuking the people for violating some traditions. But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesied with his head covered dishonors his head, but every wife who prays and prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. For if a wife will not cover her head, then she should cut her hair short. But since it is disgraceful for a wife to cut her hair or shave her head, let her cover her head. For a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. For man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. That is why a wife ought to have a symbol. This is like a really loaded phrase. Symbol of authority on her head. And then he says, comma, because of the angels. What? Okay. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor man of woman. For as woman was made from man, so man is now born of a woman. Okay, so there's an interdependent relationship between both sides. And all things are from God. Judge for yourself. And this is the part that really got me confused. Judge for yourselves, right? Is it proper for a wife to pray to God with her head uncovered? Say you. Does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is disgraceful for him? But if a woman has long hair, it is her glory. Her hair is given to her as a covering. If anyone is inclined to be contentious, we have no such practice, nor do the churches of God. And it seems like he's just saying there, no such practice where women are no longer covering their head. Now we do have such practice. So there's a lot of elements of this that I find really, really difficult to interpret. And so people debate, but the vast majority, of course, of Christianity has, and this is recent. I think the thing that really got me about the tweet was, if you use the argument that this is not done anymore, that argument could not have really won the day 100 years ago, because the majority of churches did see women having their head covered. And the last thing I want to say to you guys is, the reason why I really want to have this conversation is that it seems like it could be an example of what's called the Chesterton's fence. Are you guys familiar with that analogy? Let me describe to you. So G.K. Chesterton basically said that the difference between a conservative and a liberal is that if you're walking in the woods and you see a fence, a conservative says, I don't know why this fence is here. And so because I don't know, I'm going to leave it. And a liberal is somebody who says, I don't know why this fence is here, so let's get rid of it. It's a really perfect analogy because basically people have those two reactions to seeing a boundary. One is an assumption that I don't know the reason for it. And if I don't know the reason for it, we should leave it alone because maybe there's a good reason for it. Another reaction is if I don't know the reason for it, we should get rid of it because obviously there is no reason. And Chesterton's like, well, you don't know the reason. You don't know why the fence is there. And if you destroy it, you might suddenly discover that there was actually a really good reason for that fence to be there. And here come, you know, the reasons you're going to start to suffer. And so my question is head covering a Chestertonian fence? We didn't know why it was there. We couldn't make an articulation for it. And so we got rid of it. And all of a sudden, we're starting to, 100 years later, experience the ramifications of why that was there. Is that possible? That's my question that I started wrestling with. Go ahead, Kels.
Isn't there a quote that you have said that about traditions where it's like traditions are solutions to problems that we've forgotten or something like
Yes.
that?
Yeah, that's
Like
another
that's
quote.
what that makes me think of. As soon as you said the word tradition in that verse, I hadn't picked up on that before. That's immediately what I thought.
Yes.
Like, and the fact that this is
Traditions are solutions to problems that we forgot, like that we no longer, because they solve the problem that we don't have the problem anymore. It's very similar to the Chestertonian fence. Yes.
well, that itself is like interesting to me because the fact that he uses the word tradition,
Yeah.
um, kind of rings that bell in my head. And then I also just as a wife put myself in a position of like, what if I'm like in an argument with my husband as we like arrive to church or something, and I'm like really frustrated, and I'm just like, you're making all the wrong choices or whatever, and I have to walk in and put a head covering on, like I- that
Right.
that feels jarring to me. That feels like I am instantly put in my place, and I don't think that anyone would necessarily like that feeling,
Right.
but I think that that reminder is potentially crucial, and we don't have that at all anymore, and so you can just be angry about something you have to submit about and just either continue to be angry or continue to fight for your way or whatever whatever the situation is without having the reminder of like, okay, even though we're in the middle of a argument, I am the submissive one.
Right.
And that's so offensive to so many people nowadays.
Yeah, that's a really good example of, um, yeah, I think that's what I kind of picture is that if your lifestyle is constantly out of sync with what you experience during your 2 hours you're in worship with your head covered, that might recover that identity that I'm in a family, that my family has a leader, that I'm not the leader. And so to wear a symbol of authority, for 2 hours a week, could create a kind of culture that would arrest the kind of confusion that is erupting between genders, or within families. I don't know if that's true. I think that's a really interesting point you're making, and I wondered that. What other arguments? So Kelsey, you brought up the word tradition. By the way, I think one of the ways to sort of take a lot of the intensity out of the discussion about head coverings is to put it in a third category, which I believe it actually does exist in, and that is it's not a moral category. Now, I think this upsets both sides, I think, of the debate, but I sort of put it here, which is I think that there are traditions that are important, but they're not necessarily moral. Like I don't believe that even in the most literal reading of this passage, a woman who walks into a church with her head uncovered and prays and prophesied with her head uncovered, I don't know that I would consider that like a sinful act. Now, I think there could be a sinful spirit behind that act, but I don't know that that's a. To me, it's the question that I think is much more helpful is to say, is this a useful tradition? You know, it's no longer a tradition in any groups that I'm a part of. And it was removed as a tradition. And you guys can maybe you disagree and think, well, because he talks about nature or the angels, maybe this is a moral decision. But to me, it feels like a tradition that honors the list of reasons that he gives. And that means that it isn't primarily a question of whether or not, you should morally do this, but there could be real power to this tradition if it were reestablished. Some things that he's referring to that I think are really important. There's other things that are also important that I think this tradition violates in our culture. Could you imagine how difficult it is to do evangelism in a church where women are wearing head coverings? Um, I mean that's rough. If your model of church is primarily is the primary avenue for your outreach to the culture, And then all of a sudden, the leaders in the church and all the women start to wear head coverings. That's going to be pretty hard on that model. Good luck with that. So you could say, well, that tradition is just not valid culturally anymore. It's just too costly. And I think that that argument needs to be faced very squarely, because that's a difficult argument, to overcome. But I think this is part of the reason why the conversation to me is so interesting.